Athletes may have built pyramids, but they live in a dim pseudo-reality, struggling to overcome the limitations of their narrow hardware. Will we be victorious in the fight against the dark angels of our nature, or will we succumb to the slow poison of our worst instincts? We may find out sooner than we wish. Noise, A Flaw in Human Judgment is by Daniel Kahneman, Olivier Sibony, and Cass R. Sunstein. We previously read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, and I know we read something by Cass Sunstein. But this is a new one. This is a very recent publish in the grand scheme of things. So we are giving it a whirl. And as always, we will go through the contents of this book. Then we'll do an analysis where we talk about the good and the bad of it. And then we'll do a big picture to wrap it into a wider understanding of the world. So the contents. We like to think we get it pretty much right, at least most of the time. Noise is a book about human error. There's a tremendous amount of error in human decisions. This spans every human endeavor, but we are going to focus primarily on what the book had to say about the legal industry. For a category that is supposed to be above the proverbial fray, a beacon of objectivity, the results are a catastrophe. Now, of course, this is my particular industry, so it's of special interest to me to make sure that this is functioning properly, and having been deep inside that industry for a while, I can say with absolute certainty that this book nails a whole lot about it. So, for instance, the book references a study where it showed that judges that were given the same hypotheticals gave dramatically different results. When it came to determinations and sentencing, they were all over the map. Now, these deal with the fundamental rights of a person. This can affect your livelihood and your life, whether you have your freedom or not. But the same defendant could get vastly different sentences or outcomes, depending on the judge that they get. The studies show. For example, one burglary case, one judge gave the person, the assailant, 5 years in prison, and one judge gave the same assailant 30 days. So what's going on? In some cases, one may want to cite differences in statutes and guidelines and local laws and local priorities of law enforcement and all those sorts of things, but it's not so prosaic as that. For example, one study showed that there were more severe sentences given on days following the loss of the local football team than days following a win. Now, everybody knows this. Everybody knows that it can affect you significantly. How you think and what you think and how you act, your behavior, your philosophy about the world. All those things can be impacted pretty dramatically about just your present circumstances and things that you don't even realize. But in this particular case, you have judges that are giving more harsh sentences on days after the local football team lost. Now, it's almost certainly the case that they don't realize it. But it's certainly the case that defendants shouldn't suffer as a result of the Boise barrel snakes not doing so well, you're not kicking the field goal properly or something. Another example, defendants in France were given more lenience on their birthdays. So if it happened to be the birthday of a defendant, then it was more likely they would get a more lenient sentence. Now, this is in the other direction, because society shouldn't have to be facilitating more criminal activity or criminal behavior or encouraging recidivism or just giving more lenient sentences just by virtue of the fact that it happened to fall on the defendant's birthday. When it's hot outside, asylum seekers were less likely to get asylum granted. Again, this should be something that's applied dispassionately, and we look at the rules that govern whether somebody should be considered worthy of asylum or not. And yet, it turns out that something as irrelevant as the temperature outside can impact whether asylum is granted. And women judges were more likely to be lenient. So this is, of course, there's a gender binary that is going to likely impact what kinds of determinations that are going to be had. Now, throughout this book is produced in academia, so you would certainly expect, and there certainly is, that leftist bias, wherein they have to go in and say all of the religious rights as they go through, where they talk about discrimination, where they talk about racism and misogyny. Those are things that they have to make sure that they include. Again, just as a religious catechism. It's not something that has actual content. And that's one of the most frustrating things about discussing these kinds of topics, is because we know that it's contentless nonsense for them to have to make these admonitions about, oh no, but the sexism and the racism, we have to be aware of and careful about that. And they know that we know, but they still have to do it. It's especially frustrating when it's applied in something that's supposed to be scientific and supposed to be looking for what's true. But anyway, leaving that aside, so the whole point is that you can have dramatic differences based on things that are not even remotely understood related to fundamental decisions by fundamental decision makers. So what we would expect is that there's a cluster around a reasonable variance based on just a little bit of noise, but nothing that fundamentally impacts decision making. So this would be something like in the burglary case earlier, where you have the same defendant, same circumstances, and two different judges. You would expect that they would cluster around, it'd be like 5 years versus 5 years in a couple of weeks, and they would cluster somewhere around there. And so you'd know that it was like a platonic form. You would have some real and justifiable and reasonable result or judgment, and there would be a little bit of noise pulling people one way or the other, but it wouldn't really fundamentally impact people. But that's not what we see. Judges even disagree with themselves, so they can be given the same case on 2 separate days and disagree with their first decision or disagree with the second decision, and do so dramatically. This is termed by the book occasion noise. Additionally, good mood is something that dramatically and archetypally impacts a person's judgments, including a judge's judgment. So if you're in a good mood, you're far more likely to let your biases affect your judgments. You're more likely to throw the guy off the bridge in the trolley problem if you're in a good mood. You're not the same person at all times. Neither are judges who are making fundamental decisions. Now, these judges are almost certainly, and I've worked with many of them, and I can tell you this firsthand, they're almost certainly the best of us trying to do these things in the proper way. But the best doesn't mean good. It's all relative. It's graded on a curve. Additionally, physicians were more likely to prescribe opiates at the end of the day. So just because they're at the end, they're tired. They have gone through just a monstrous session of trying to hand out medical services. And at the end of the day, they're just more likely to just want to get rid of it and try to make it easier. So what's the answer to this? What's the answer? Just to take human decision makers out of it altogether? Well, that's part of it. So models apparently work better than humans. If you have models that have useful structures, that have made sense, that use just a couple of inputs, then they do better than humans do. So such as in bail, they would try to add a whole bunch of different factors to determine whether somebody's going to flee their bail and how much to do and all that sort of thing. They tried this whole cavalcade of factors, this whole constellation of factors, try to determine what is the best way to figure out how much somebody should pay for bail. And eventually they narrowed it down to the 2 most fundamental factors, age and times fled before. And when you use those, even though you might have some variance or missing accuracy at the ends, then that's going to fundamentally get you in the right place. Just these 2 major factors, age and times fled before. And just using that as opposed to the individual judgment of a person is a much more effective way to apply it. And here the book discusses that we need not exacerbate racial disparities. This is another, it's a religious right. They have to make sure that they say it and it gets out there. It's the kind of noise of the patronizing white guilt that they have to make sure to insert into everything. But one thing that I just love thinking about this is that say you had an AI or algorithm, or you just looked at how humans have decided it for a very long time now, and you were trying to figure out, okay, who are the best basketball players to choose? And for your team, if you want to win, that's the whole point, is to win. Who are the best players that you can choose? And it happens to return 90% black athletes. So then you say, oh my gosh, the algorithm must be horribly, horribly biased, right? No, of course, everybody would be fine with that kind of a bias in an algorithm and say that, oh, well, it's just trying to figure out what's best. But in any other configuration wherein certain races are placed more prevalently than others, or certain genders more prevalently than others, then we say, oh, well, there must be something wrong with it. Just like the current college system has far more females going and graduating than it does males. They're proportionally getting more degrees and going to college more. So therefore, it must be a biased system. Whoever the decision makers are must be misandrists who hate men and are trying to keep them out. Now, that could very well be the case, especially nowadays in admissions. But the more likely explanation is that there are a whole bunch of factors that go into it that we don't necessarily understand, and they are impacting the proportions, and it's not some kind of a conscious effort to do something on a discriminatory basis. Now, of course, when it comes to college admissions, then there are deliberate efforts to try to do that, and there have been for a very long time, but there are almost certainly much larger, much more complex longitudinal trends that are impacting it much more significantly than the individual efforts of, individual schools that are just giving more female-centric scholarships. And another thing to do is that when you average 2 opinions, then it tends to do a lot better than just one people making a decision. And one of the things that people become kind of balkanized in their expertise, and they want to have that. They want that prestige to say that I'm the expert, I've made a determination, and that's just what needs to be applied. You think of a doctor who makes a determination and then is outraged or offended when you seek a second opinion. Well, it's almost certainly like that with every expert. They don't want to share that. But when it comes to statistically, it's much more likely for people to be more closer to the right answer and less biased and have less noise if you're averaging out opinions between multiple people. So it's like the wisdom of crowds, or even the crowd within. So if you average out determinations that you made at different times, then it's more likely to be closer to the truth or reality or more accurate determination. And there was this theorist, was it Weber or Weber? He defined diagnoses as a system of law in which judges are empowered to decide each case according to what they see as its individual merits, without referring to a settled and coherent body of norms or rules, and without employing a rational set of judicial procedures. So this is maximum noise. This is a kind of system that would maximize the amount of noise that one would hear, one would have in trying to make determinations. So this is the opposite of everything the book is trying to advocate for. And it's actually really interesting to think about the extremes on either side. So the book is advocating for a method by which we reduce noise as much as we can, but not to zero. The book actually suggests that noise, there is an important function of noise. In some cases, we can't know what it's going to impact on a larger scale. And suggests that noise is a rights violation and can be, especially in the judicial system. When you have too much noise, it could be a fundamental violation of a person's rights. So there's a lot in the book, obviously, and we're just trying to distill it down to a few things so you get an idea of what it's about. Moving on to the analysis, there were actually some harsh one-star reviews that I actually wanted to talk about that I found online when I was doing research into the book. So here's one of them. I was recently purchased this product, Noise Bluetooth Earbuds VS201V3. Nearly 1 month happened, but now this product is totally not working properly. I was trying to pair the device with my phone. It shows 2 pairing name, which is totally not good. Another one, even my device is connected with the Bluetooth. Again, it says device is ready to connect. I don't know what type of quality products they are producing nowadays. In product description, mentioned as 60 hours playtime, but it's not playing even 10 hours continuously. I'm not happy with this product, and I'm requesting Noise to check on this issue and try to resolve my concern. So that was a 1-star review. It was pretty scathing that the book did not accomplish what it set out to accomplish, and that it wasn't really connecting the ideas that it was trying to present. So another 1-star review, worst experience with noise. Oof, that's a harsh one. It's more than 4 days. They have not provided me any update regarding my product. Neither they have provided me any tracking ID. Whenever I am calling to their customer service, they are simply saying they will resolve my issue, but none of them are resolving. Pathetic experience with noise. Angry face, angry face, angry face. So 3 angry faces for the book in this context. They were not happy with kind of the accessibility of the way that the book worked. When they were trying to call in to glean the important ideas from the book, they were not getting it. So they gave it 3 angry faces. And then this one, along the same lines from The Guardian. To be strictly fair, the authors do acknowledge the existence of algorithmic bias, although they perhaps underestimate its magnitude. A crucial point they do not acknowledge, however, is that algorithms don't merely replicate human biases, they amplify them, and by a significant amount. One that was trained on a dataset where pictures of cooking were 33% more likely to involve women than men, ended up associating pictures of kitchens with women 68% of the time. Until these issues are ironed out, we should beware of social scientists bearing algorithm-driven gifts. So that was The Guardian. So yeah, like I said, along the same lines, they have a criticism related to what the book says later on, that simple models are actually way better than humans when it comes to bias. And they question very strongly the association of kitchens and women in pictures and suggest that it's complete insanity to think that there might be differences between the sexes. I mean, crazy, right? So for my part, I think the book was not quite as insightful or revolutionary as Thinking Fast and Slow. That book was a great read. And it didn't seem like it had as much content as Thinking Fast and Slow, or it had necessarily enough content for the extent of the book. Now, I am reading it again right now, along with the other books that I'm reading, because it's just not enough to read these books one time. I've got to start reading them twice at least, and maybe more, and do a couple of extra episodes so we can talk about specific issues on each one. But in this case, like I said, it didn't necessarily seem like it had a sufficient amount to be revolutionary for the duration of the book. That said, it could be far more important as a topic than Thinking Fast and Slow was, because this is the kind of thing that if you could fundamentally alter the way that noise works and the way that humans make decisions, then you could fundamentally improve the experiences of every human, which is, what should be on all of our bucket lists. So recommend, and I would love anybody who has read it to, discuss, try to figure out what's the best way to implement a reduction of noise, or whether it's important at all to reduce noise, what kind of impact that might have on just the human aspect of the way that we interact. I mean, it's not to say that it's necessarily the case that we should be reducing all of the more human elements of the way that we interact. But in my experience, or my understanding and experience and thought, is that there are certain fundamental things that we shouldn't be playing around with. We shouldn't be toying around with our legal rights. We should be figuring that out, getting it established, and having it as unbiased as humanly possible. Because there's a lot of room for abuse in those areas, and whether it's intentional abuse or unintentional abuse, it happens, and it happens a lot. So big picture-wise, the legal system is the foundation of civilization. It is the last step before stepping into the bloody, limb-strewn arena. So this amount of noise is a disaster. It must be replaced. That's, like I said, leaving aside the intentional corruption, which might be less odious because they're at least aware of it, but the noise itself is really, really bad. As we transition to more capable decision makers, many people, like the reviewers above, will try to impose their noise and bias on the systems that we're designing. So we finally need a means to relegate bad decision makers to the trash heap of history. We'll see what those means might be. But whatever the case, of course, we are doing our part by trying to be more educated and understanding and thoughtful and brilliant and incredible and next level in trying to approach these kinds of problems. So thank you very much. I know it's been few and far between. There have been so many issues in the interim when it comes to reading these books and getting these things produced. But anybody who's out there, anybody who's listening to this, thank you very much. And I hope this stimulated something, and I hope we have a lot more to talk about in the near future. See you on the next one. Bye.